We're now focusing on the third category of overeating situational types, which is emotional eating that leads to overeating. I think of emotional eating as the big banana. This is the big player in our relationship with food and our food wars. It certainly has a profound effect for many people on eating too much, which is what we're talking about right now. And it also might very well be the thing that's permeating and fueling much of your food war. This behavior of emotional eating is eating as a result of, or in reaction to, emotion. It's very common, it's very pervasive, and it's complex. So whether emotional eating leads to eating too much or not, the goal for anyone I've ever worked with and for myself when dealing with my own food war was to simply end this eating pattern. We don't want to eat because of or in reaction to emotion as an eating behavior that shows up daily or weekly in our eating life. It's not particularly healthy, and more often than not, it does lead to overeating, eating too much. So this is a big topic, and I'm going to give you the foundation on emotional eating here in this lesson and the next one, lesson 6. This topic of emotional eating, whether it leads to overeating or not, feels like the hot button for you, the big issue, the one that needs a lot more attention. Tell me, because then I can give you so much more teaching around it. And please share that in the Facebook group as well. So first, let's start with the definition. What exactly is emotional eating, and how do you know if you're doing it? What does it look like? I like to break down the definition of what it is and how it shows up in a few parts. First, in its most simple and common form, emotional eating is eating, putting food into your mouth, solely because you're feeling a feeling, which is most often negative, and you don't really want to continue feeling that feeling, so you eat as a way to shift your state of being in that moment to not feel that feeling anymore. This is probably the most common way we think about it. And here's what that looks like. In any moment, your emotional state can shift. This might be where 5 minutes ago you were feeling fairly calm and neutral, and your mind and your body were in a peaceful state while you were doing your thing. But now, 5 minutes later, some thoughts started swirling in your head about maybe a problem in your life. And in an instant, those thoughts have now produced a feeling of, say, deep sadness, maybe even grief. So you feel that sadness, your body is now more lethargic, it's zapped of energy, and maybe even a bit of a paralyzed feeling sets in. And with this, your mind is in a total loop. And ideally, all you want is to get out of there. You want to exit that state of being with all that sadness and heaviness now flowing through your cells. The core reason of why the sadness flowed in the first place is not relevant for our purposes in this moment. The feeling could have come because of many different triggers, both thought-related and energy-related. So guess what would seem really good in that moment to get you out of feeling those sad, heavy, negative feelings? Oh, a donut might do it pretty fast. No, seriously, I'm not being sarcastic. A few cookies, or 5, or 10, would definitely do the trick and shift your emotional state really fast. Why? Well, let's keep using sugar as an example. There's 2 reasons why sugar would get you out of that sad feeling state pretty fast. Pleasure and biology or biological. For pleasure, hey, sugary things taste good. The pleasure of sweet food is very appealing when in that particular moment you're feeling emotional pain. We as humans are biologically programmed to avoid pain, i.e. feeling the negative feeling, and to seek pleasure, i.e. the sweet taste of the donut or the cookie. So biologically, it certainly makes sense that we would turn to sugar to shift our emotional state pretty darn fast. It works. In addition, sugar physically changes our chemistry, our biological state, which is what we want in the moment. If you're feeling sad, there's something very specific happening with your neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin that's different than when you were feeling calm and decently happy 5 minutes ago. Guess what very swiftly, chemically shifts those neurotransmitters again? Sugar. It's a drug, and it works fast. So after about 10 minutes of eating sugar, we feel happier, we feel lighter, we feel less sad. So it makes total sense why somebody would emotionally eat with sugar. Now, let's use another example of what can happen with emotional eating for this first definition or first scenario of it. Fatty foods make sense too for what you might be drawn to if you're eating emotionally. Let's use the emotions of worry and anxiety for this example. 1 minute, you're calmly going about your day, and in the next, you just dug into some worrisome thoughts about something that may or may not happen tomorrow. And within minutes, you now feel wrought with worry and anxiety. These are different emotions than sadness in that first example. With this worry and anxiety, your mind is racing and your body gets heightened and even maybe a bit excitable. In addition, it might start to feel tight and restricted or constricted at the same time. Now notice, by the way, that what I just described for feeling anxiety and worry is a different set of body reactions than what I described for the bodily experience of sadness. This will be relevant later. So guess what kind of foods might help get you out of this anxiety, worry state the fastest? Yep, those good old fatty things. Any kind of fat. Nuts, oils, butter, fried chicken, cheese, creamy pasta, or perhaps that heavy cake full of fat and sugar. Fat is heavy, it's grounding, it gives us a sense of security, which is exactly what we're not feeling and so much when we're wanting, when anxiety or nervousness is coursing through our cells. So these are just a few examples for the first definition of emotional eating, which is eating solely because you're feeling a feeling that you'd rather not feel, so you eat as a way to shift your state of being in that moment and not feel that feeling anymore. The second definition that we're going to work with now for this explanation of emotional eating is that emotional eating can also be eating as a result of not wanting to feel a feeling. And what I mean by this is that it could be possible that you're not actually feeling a strong emotion yet, but for whatever reason, you're in fear that it's coming. I figured out that this is what I did very regularly when I was emotionally eating, like every day or every few days. Something like a repeated thought or an interaction with another or a situation that would come up that day would trigger me to remember a feeling I didn't particularly like that I had felt often, like despair. And in an instant, the thought would set in of, oh, well, I don't want to feel that again. And immediately the fear of feeling the feeling creeping in again would take over. So when the fear set in, my programming and body response then went to what I had done before to get out of that feeling, which was eat. It's kind of like that Pavlov dog response thing again, because truly this fear process that I just described is not a highly conscious process. You're doubtfully aware of all that's happening, but your awareness will kick in when you start eating and then realize that you weren't really hungry in the first place, so why really are you eating right now? Another angle to present this idea that you might resonate with is that emotional eating feels like a distraction. It can. So in the first definition, our scenario of emotional eating I gave, it's a drive to eat to physically change your state, to feel relief, to see a shift. And with this one, it might feel a bit more like you really just want a distraction from where you're at. So you distract yourself with eating, and that could be eating anything, and especially eating something pleasurable. You want a diversion. You may want comfort. And it's very easy when you're in this place to eat too much. For some people, it's really not about the actual food or the pleasure of the food. It's about the quantity immediately. And that, of course, is where it's relevant here to overeating. Feeling stuffed is a distraction in itself. And finally, for our third definition of emotional eating, it can simply be in response to an emotion, usually positive, without necessarily the drive to change your state, as I described in the first scenario. What I mean by this is that sometimes we eat in response to feeling very positive emotions, like happy and excited. We don't discriminate here when it comes to emotional eating. We are an equal opportunity employer as humans. So we might feel on fire, we feel invigorated, something good just happened. And then we find ourselves eating solely in response to those positive emotions. We may not be particularly hungry at the time, but we want to go eat in response to the feeling. So this is slightly different than the first two scenarios because with this one, you wouldn't be eating to feel better and get out of being in an uncomfortable situation or state. you would be eating in response to the usually positive emotional state you're in. I think the argument can be made that this is not necessarily a bad thing in theory, but the issue comes again when this is an eating pattern. When eating in response to emotion, positive or negative, happens as a consistent behavioral daily or weekly pattern, and then as a result, you're eventually either overeating because of it, or you're eating too many things too often that aren't the healthy choices you want to be making. Both of these situations could be problematic for your weight and your health, and therefore fueling your food war. Great, so I've given you a picture for different ways emotional eating could be showing up. The goal right now is simply to know if it's there, and if so, how exactly is it showing up for you? Please know that you might even come up with slightly different ways emotional eating is in your eating life than how I've described it here on this video, and that's fine. You just want to get super aware of what it is for you. The action guide gives you a chance to reflect on this and capture it. So my suggestion is to pause here and use the action guide for that purpose. In the next lesson, lesson 6, it's going to take you through a step-by-step process to transform your emotional eating, especially as it relates to overeating. In preparation for that action process, there's 2 important questions we should examine. First, where do the emotions come from? And the second question that follows right on the heels of that one, do we need to know where they come from for the purpose of ending emotional eating? How much should we care why the emotions were triggered to be there in the first place in order to end it? For the first question of where do the emotions come from, the truth is that they can be triggered by so many factors and probably are. I find that most people have a primary inner circle of emotions, ones that you keep feeling regularly over and over again. And we'll get to defining them for you in the next section. These emotions in your inner circle may be fueled by the same series of thoughts that you keep thinking over and over. I call these the best friend thoughts. They're the ones that feel like your best friends because they always seem to be there. When I was engaging with emotional eating on a daily basis, a few of my best friend thoughts were things like, I will never get what I want with my career. Ending this binge eating is hopeless. I'll be fat forever. I'm just not good enough to get the part in that show, attract the love of my life, add more. Every time one of these thoughts entered into my mind and I listened to it, which was pretty much all the time, I would instantly then experience the emotion. So thought forms which are only energy trigger another kind of energy, emotion. So in a split second, the thought energy of this will never change invited in the emotion energy into my body of, I'm so sad. I feel great despair. So emotions very often get experienced because of thoughts. A thought fuels you to experience the feeling. And it can certainly be more than just those best friend thoughts at any time that can trigger any emotion. You could be thinking a thought about your past, so the situation or event isn't even real, it's not happening in present time, but because of your thought about the past situation, you feel the emotion now in real time. Emotions come from more sources than I can name or are probably even aware of. But another big source I do know of that doesn't involve thought directly is from energetic transference, where emotions sometimes are like given to us from others. So instead of them coming to us as triggered by the thoughts in our own head, sometimes we can feel the emotion of another who's physically next to us or maybe even physically far away, and we literally take in that person's emotions. Emotions are energy. So it's like that person's energy in the form of emotion just floats right over to us and we suck it into our bodies, consciously or not. It can flow right in like osmosis. Wendy DeRosa, the intuitive healer who offered a guided meditation for us in step 3, talks a lot about this. Her work helps you understand how energy gets blocked, how it gets cleared, and how we share it. How do we take it in from others and give it right back? If this area interests you, please do check out her site at schoolofintuitivestudies.com. She has a lot of free trainings and resources. So in answer to the first question of where do emotions come from, you now have a working understanding that emotions can come from thoughts both in the present and about the past, and emotions can be felt from energy transference. And as I mentioned, I'm sure there's many other sources as well for how and why feelings just get in there. Now let's talk about the next question of, do we care to know where the feelings came from? Or do we need to know how they showed up or exactly what triggered what we feel? To help heal and end your emotional eating, I think it's a great idea to identify and explore any possible source of what is triggering your emotions. This could be gaining awareness if you're indeed taking in the emotional energy of another person, or if your best friend thoughts are the main culprits. I definitely encourage you to do this kind of exploration either by yourself or with a skilled counselor, or with someone like Wendy DeRosa, who's a highly skilled intuitive healer. However, for our purposes here in this program, I'm not going to guide you through a process for this right now, or even suggest that you stop your flow of personal work in this course to do this right now. I'm not guiding you through the process to do this now because it's a big, ongoing practice that requires your attention to it when you have it. And what I truly want for you right now is to get to it, to heal and end your emotional eating as quickly as possible. The great news is that I know you can do this without knowing the trigger reason for why the emotion came in the first place. It's possible to end emotional eating without going through hours of analyzation around the source for why the emotion popped in. Because I know this is possible, and I want to guide you into the shortest route to see your emotional overeating end quickly, I'm simply suggesting to do that exploration another time. Instead, stay with me here for the next steps in what to do now to heal your emotional eating.